Sir, I'm gonna need you to step back from the counter.
I'm just trying to get a room for the night.
You causing problems here? This isn't the kind of place for people like you.
People like me, I have identification and payment.
Yeah, right. Let me guess. You're some big shot businessman. Why don't you try...
A successful black CEO walked into his own hotel on a cold December night in 2024, dressed in casual clothes to check on his new business. What happened next would expose shocking discrimination that millions would see on camera. The incident would lead to mass firings and spark national outrage about racism in America. The Grandview Hotel stood like a gleaming tower on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, its marble lobby and crystal chandeliers designed to impress wealthy guests from around the world. The four-star establishment had been a symbol of luxury hospitality for over 30 years, attracting business executives, celebrities, and tourists willing to pay premium prices for exceptional service. On this cold December evening, the hotel's elegant facade masked a culture of discrimination that would soon be exposed in the most dramatic way possible. Dr. Jonathan Miles had just become the owner of this prestigious property, adding it to his growing empire of luxury hotels across the Midwest. At 42 years old, he had built Miles Hospitality Group from nothing, starting with a single restaurant in Chicago's South Side and expanding into one of the most successful black-owned hospitality companies in America. His journey from poverty to prosperity had been marked by countless obstacles, including the very type of racial discrimination he was about to experience firsthand. Growing up in Chicago's roughest neighborhoods, Jonathan had learned early that success required not just hard work, but also the ability to navigate a world where his skin color often determined how he was treated. His mother, a hotel housekeeper, had worked double shifts to pay for his education, instilling in him both a deep appreciation for hospitality workers and an unwavering determination to prove that black excellence could not be denied. After graduating from Northwestern University with honors, he had climbed the corporate ladder while facing subtle and overt racism at every level. Dr. Miles had developed a unique business practice that set him apart from other hotel executives. He regularly conducted unannounced visits to his properties, often dressing in casual clothing to see how his staff treated ordinary customers. This undercover approach had revealed numerous problems over the years, from poor service standards to employee theft. However, it had also exposed something far more troubling in several of his hotels, a pattern of discriminatory behavior that he was determined to eliminate from his business empire. The Grandview Hotel represented his latest acquisition and his biggest challenge yet. The property had a reputation for exclusivity that bordered on elitism, catering to a predominantly white, wealthy clientele. Dr. Miles had heard whispered complaints from minority business associates about cold treatment and unexplained lack of availability at the Grandview, but previous management had always dismissed these concerns as misunderstandings or isolated incidents. On this particular December night, Dr. Miles had decided to test the hotel's service standards personally. He deliberately chose casual attire, old jeans, sneakers, and a simple hoodie that would not immediately signal his wealth or status. He wanted to experience exactly what an ordinary black customer might encounter when seeking accommodation at his newest property. What he discovered would shock him to his core and force him to make decisions that would reverberate throughout the entire hospitality industry. Jason Miller had been working the night shift at the Grandview Hotel for 3 years, and in that time, he had developed what he considered a keen eye for spotting guests who did not belong in their upscale establishment. At 28 years old, the pale, thin receptionist took pride in what he called maintaining the hotel's standards, though his definition of standards had nothing to do with actual service quality and everything to do with the color of guests' skin and his assumptions about their economic status. Miller's personnel file contained a disturbing pattern that hotel management had consistently ignored or explained away. Over the past 18 months, 17 formal complaints had been filed against him by minority guests who described dismissive treatment, claims of no availability despite visible empty rooms, and outright refusal of service. Each complaint had been investigated by the hotel's previous management team, but Miller's explanations were always accepted without serious scrutiny. He claimed personality conflicts, misunderstandings, or guest unreasonableness, and his supervisors seemed eager to avoid deeper examination of what was clearly discriminatory behavior. The hotel's booking system revealed an even more troubling pattern when examined closely. On nights when Miller worked the front desk, the hotel showed dramatically higher rates of claimed full occupancy when minority guests inquired about rooms, yet actual occupancy rates on those same nights averaged only 60 to 70%. Miller had become skilled at using the computer system to hide available inventory, telling unwanted guests that rooms were booked while keeping those same rooms available for guests he deemed more appropriate. Miller's discriminatory behavior was not conducted in isolation. Night security supervisor Marcus Thompson, a stocky white man in his 40s, had observed these incidents dozens of times but never reported them to upper management. Thompson had developed his own role in the discrimination, positioning himself near the front desk whenever minority guests approached and using his presence as an intimidation tactic. His security reports never mentioned these encounters, creating a paper trail that made the discrimination invisible to corporate oversight. Assistant manager Patricia Walsh represented the institutional enabling that allowed Miller's behavior to flourish unchecked. At 52 years old, Walsh had worked in hospitality management for over 2 decades and understood both the legal requirements for equal service and the company policies prohibiting discrimination. However, she had made a calculated decision to protect her staff rather than her guests' civil rights. When complaints arose, Walsh consistently supported Miller's version of events and helped craft explanations that avoided acknowledging discriminatory intent. The hotel's parent company, Prestige Hospitality Management, had settled 3 separate discrimination lawsuits in the previous 2 years involving other properties in their portfolio. Despite these costly legal defeats, the company had implemented no meaningful changes to prevent future incidents. Training programs remained superficial, focusing on customer service techniques rather than addressing implicit bias or discriminatory practices. Corporate audits examined financial performance and guest satisfaction scores, but ignored concerning patterns in booking data that clearly showed discriminatory service practices. Miller's confidence in his discriminatory behavior stemmed from years of management support and lack of consequences. He had learned to use coded language when discussing unwanted guests, referring to concerns about clientele standards or maintaining the hotel's reputation. These euphemisms allowed him and his supervisors to discuss discrimination without explicitly acknowledging their illegal actions, creating a culture where civil rights violations were normalized and systematized. The financial incentives within the hotel also encouraged discriminatory behavior in subtle but powerful ways. Staff members believed that maintaining an exclusive, predominantly white guest environment would result in higher tips and more job security. Miller had convinced himself that his discriminatory practices were actually protecting the business and his fellow employees, creating a moral framework that justified his illegal actions. Corporate oversight failures created the perfect environment for systematic discrimination to thrive. Minimal supervision during overnight shifts meant that Miller and his colleagues operated with virtual autonomy. Monthly corporate reviews focused entirely on revenue metrics and guest satisfaction surveys. But these surveys were only sent to guests who had actually received service, creating a built-in bias that excluded victims of discrimination from the feedback process. The pattern of discrimination at the Grandview Hotel represented more than individual prejudice. It was a systematic failure of corporate responsibility, management oversight, and institutional accountability that had created an environment where civil rights violations were not just tolerated, but actively enabled by multiple layers of complicity. The heavy glass doors of the Grandview Hotel swung open at exactly 11:03 p.m. as Dr. Jonathan Miles stepped into the marble lobby. The security camera mounted in the upper corner captured every detail of his arrival, recording what would become some of the most damaging evidence of workplace discrimination ever documented. Dr. Miles wore faded blue jeans, clean but worn Nike sneakers, and a simple black hoodie under an unzipped winter jacket. His dark skin and casual attire immediately set him apart from the hotel's typical late-night clientele, though his confident stride suggested someone comfortable in upscale environments. Behind the polished reception desk, Jason Miller looked up from his computer screen as the approaching footsteps echoed across the marble floor. The camera captured Miller's immediate transformation from professional hospitality worker to defensive gatekeeper. His shoulders stiffened, his welcoming expression disappeared completely, and he cast a meaningful glance toward the security station positioned near the lobby's elegant seating area. Miller's pale complexion and crisp hotel uniform embodied the establishment's polished image, but his body language revealed instant judgment about the black man walking toward his counter. Dr. Miles approached the reception desk with the easy confidence of someone who traveled frequently and understood hotel procedures. The security footage showed him placing his hands casually on the marble counter as he spoke. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying the educated cadence of a business professional. "I'd like a room for tonight, please." Without hesitation, he reached into his wallet and placed his driver's license on the counter, a practiced gesture that demonstrated his familiarity with standard check-in requirements. Miller barely glanced at the identification document before responding, though the security camera captured him looking directly at the name and photo. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're completely booked tonight," he announced with a dismissive tone that hadn't been present moments earlier when he had enthusiastically welcomed a white couple. The computer screen visible in the camera frame clearly contradicted his statement, showing multiple room types displayed in green text indicating immediate availability. The lie was so obvious and immediate that it suggested Miller had made his decision to deny service within seconds of seeing Dr. Miles approach. The security system's audio pickup captured the subtle but unmistakable change in Miller's voice, from professional courtesy to cold dismissal. His refusal to even pretend to check availability revealed that this was not a business decision, but a racial one. Dr. Miles maintained his composed demeanor, though the high-resolution camera captured a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested recognition of what was occurring. He had experienced this type of discrimination before, but never as the owner of the establishment where it was happening. "Are you sure about that?" he asked calmly. "I'm willing to pay cash for any available room." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a substantial roll of bills, placing the money beside his identification on the marble counter. The sight of cash seemed to agitate Miller further rather than resolve the situation. In most business transactions, immediate cash payment would be welcomed, but Miller's reaction suggested that no amount of money would change his decision. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back from the counter," he said, his voice rising slightly as he gestured for Dr. Miles to move away from the desk. The security camera recorded the approach of Marcus Thompson, the night security guard, who began moving closer to the reception area with deliberate purpose. His hand rested casually on his radio, and his positioning was clearly designed to intimidate rather than assist. Thompson, a stocky white man in his 40s, had witnessed this exact scenario play out numerous times before, and his immediate support of Miller's discriminatory actions demonstrated the systematic nature of the problem. "I'm just trying to get accommodation for the night," Dr. Miles responded, his voice remaining level but firm. The camera showed him making no move to step away from the counter, his posture radiating the confidence of someone unaccustomed to being dismissed without cause. "I have valid identification and payment. What exactly seems to be the problem here?" Miller's agitation became increasingly visible as he realized his initial dismissal was not working as intended. Most victims of his discrimination accepted the false claims about availability and left quietly, but Dr. Miles was clearly not following that expected pattern. "Look, maybe you should try some of the motels down on State Street," Miller suggested, his tone making the class implications unmistakably clear. "This is a 4-star establishment with certain standards." The phrase "certain standards" hung in the air like a loaded weapon, its discriminatory implications captured clearly by the security system's sensitive audio equipment. Miller's suggestion that Dr. Miles seek accommodation at budget motels rather than a luxury hotel revealed the core assumption driving his behavior. He had looked at a well-dressed, articulate black man with valid identification and immediate cash payment and decided that such a person could not possibly belong in an upscale environment. "Doctor." Miles's response demonstrated both his business acumen and his understanding of civil rights law. "I'm not interested in other establishments," he said clearly. "I'm interested in securing accommodation here at this hotel tonight. I have money, identification, and I'm requesting service that you're legally required to provide without regard to my race." The direct mention of race seemed to shock Miller, who apparently expected his discrimination to remain unspoken and unacknowledged. His face flushed visibly as he realized that his actions were being explicitly identified as racially motivated rather than business-related. The tension in the Grandview Hotel lobby escalated dramatically as security guard Marcus Thompson positioned himself directly behind Dr. Miles, creating a semicircle of intimidation that the overhead camera captured in stark detail. Thompson's presence transformed what should have been a routine business transaction into a confrontational situation designed to pressure Dr. Miles into leaving without further protest. The security footage showed Thompson's hand moving to his radio, a gesture clearly intended to suggest that backup or police intervention might be necessary to handle what Miller was characterizing as a problematic situation. Dr. Miles slowly turned to acknowledge Thompson's presence, his movement controlled and deliberate. The camera recorded his calm assessment of the security guard's positioning and obvious attempt at intimidation. "Is there something I can help you with?" Dr. Miles asked Thompson directly, his voice maintaining its professional tone despite the increasingly hostile environment. Thompson's response was minimal, just a grunt and a meaningful look toward Miller, but his continued presence sent a clear message about whose side he was taking in this confrontation. From the back office emerged Assistant Manager Patricia Walsh, drawn by the commotion at the front desk. The security camera captured her quick assessment of the situation as she took in the scene. A black man in casual clothes facing off against her white employees with cash and identification visible on the counter. Rather than investigating what appeared to be a service issue, Walsh immediately aligned herself with her staff's position without gathering any information about what had transpired. "Is there a problem here?" Walsh asked, directing her question to Miller rather than Dr. Miles, immediately establishing whose perspective she considered relevant. Her body language and positioning supported the discriminatory stance her employees had taken, adding management authority to what was clearly becoming an organized effort to deny service based on race. The camera recorded Walsh's crisp business suit and professional appearance, creating a stark contrast with her unprofessional decision to support obvious discrimination. Miller seized the opportunity to justify his actions to his supervisor. "This gentleman is demanding a room, but I've explained that we're fully booked tonight," he told Walsh, his voice taking on a tone of injured professionalism. The security footage clearly showed him gesturing toward Dr. Miles in a dismissive manner while maintaining eye contact with Walsh, seeking her approval for his discriminatory behavior. Dr. Miles reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, placing it on the marble counter next to his identification and cash. "Perhaps this will clarify things," he said calmly, the camera capturing the embossed lettering of what was clearly an expensive professional business card. "I'm Dr. Jonathan Miles, CEO of Miles Hospitality Group. I believe there may be some confusion about your availability." The business card lay on the counter like evidence in a courtroom, but Walsh barely glanced at it before responding. Her prejudice acted like a cognitive filter, preventing her from processing information that contradicted her assumptions about the black man standing before her. "I'm sure Mr. Miller has checked our availability thoroughly," she said, her tone suggesting that she considered the matter closed, regardless of what credentials Dr. Miles might present. The security camera captured a moment that would later become crucial evidence in the legal proceedings that followed. Dr. Miles pointed directly at Miller's computer screen, which was angled enough to be visible from his position at the counter. "Your system is showing available rooms right now," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood hotel management systems intimately. "I can see the green indicators for available inventory from here." Miller's response revealed the depth of his commitment to discrimination regardless of evidence. He actually moved to block Dr. Miles' view of the computer screen while insisting, "Our system doesn't show what you think it shows. I'm telling you, we have no availability." His willingness to maintain an obvious lie even when directly confronted with contradictory evidence demonstrated how deeply embedded his prejudice had become. Walsh stepped closer to the counter, her presence adding weight to Miller's false claims. "Sir, our employees are trained professionals who understand our booking system," she declared, though the security footage would later reveal that she never actually looked at the computer screen herself. Her blind support of discriminatory behavior represented the institutional enabling that allowed such practices to flourish unchecked. Dr. Miles remained remarkably calm despite facing organized opposition from multiple hotel employees. "I find it interesting that a four-star hotel would have no availability on a Tuesday night in December," he observed, his tone carrying implications that the staff couldn't yet understand. The camera recorded him looking around the nearly empty lobby, his gesture highlighting the absurdity of claims about full occupancy when the public areas showed minimal guest activity. The security footage captured the moment when Dr. Miles made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. He began gathering his identification and business card from the counter, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I think I understand the situation here quite clearly," he said, his voice carrying a weight that none of the hotel staff could interpret. "This has been very educational indeed." As Dr. Miles prepared to leave, Walsh made a final statement that the security cameras recorded with perfect clarity. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone," she announced. invoking legal language that she clearly didn't understand. Her attempt to use property rights to justify discrimination revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of civil rights law and public accommodation requirements. Officer David Patterson had been reviewing incident reports in the hotel's side office when the commotion at the front desk caught his attention. The security camera captured his emergence from the office, his uniform and badge immediately transforming the atmosphere in the lobby from a business dispute into a potential law enforcement matter. At 37 years old, Patterson had developed a reputation among his colleagues for aggressive tactics and quick assumptions, particularly when dealing with minority citizens. His presence at the Grandview Hotel that night would prove to be a catastrophic escalation of an already illegal situation. Patterson approached the front desk with the swagger of someone accustomed to having his authority go unquestioned. The security footage showed him assessing the scene quickly, his eyes taking in Dr. Miles's casual attire, the defensive postures of the hotel staff, and the obvious tension in the air. Without gathering any information about what had transpired, Patterson immediately positioned himself as an ally of the hotel employees, demonstrating how quickly racial solidarity could override professional neutrality and proper police procedure. "Is there a problem here?" Patterson asked, directing his question exclusively to Miller and Walsh, while completely ignoring Dr. Miles. His body language and positioning made clear that he had already decided who represented legitimate authority and who represented a potential threat. The camera recorded his hand moving instinctively toward his belt, a gesture that transformed a civil rights violation into a situation with the potential for criminal charges or physical confrontation. Dr. Miles turned to address Patterson directly, his movement controlled and respectful despite the obvious bias the officer was displaying. "No problem, officer," he said clearly. "I'm simply trying to secure accommodation for the evening. I have proper identification and payment, but these employees claim there are no available rooms despite clear evidence to the contrary." His response demonstrated both his understanding of the legal situation and his attempt to provide Patterson with accurate information. Patterson's reaction revealed the depth of his prejudice and his willingness to use police authority to support discrimination. "You causing problems here?" he demanded, his tone immediately confrontational. "This isn't the kind of place for people like you." The phrase hung in the air like an admission of guilt, his discriminatory assumptions captured clearly by the hotel's audio recording system. His statement represented not just personal bias, but the use of government authority to enforce racial segregation. The security camera recorded Dr. Miles's measured response to this outrageous statement. "People like me?" he repeated, his voice maintaining its educated cadence despite the obvious insult. "I'm a business professional seeking commercial accommodation." "What exactly do you mean by people like me?" His direct challenge to Patterson's discriminatory language forced the officer to either clarify his racist statement or retreat from his position. Instead of backing down, Patterson doubled down on his discriminatory stance with statements that would later provide devastating evidence in federal civil rights proceedings. "Yeah, right, let me guess," he said with obvious sarcasm. "You're some big-shot businessman?" His mocking laughter echoed through the marble lobby, the sound captured with crystal clarity by the security system. "Why don't you try the shelter down the street where you belong?" The suggestion that a well-dressed, articulate man with valid identification and substantial cash should seek accommodation at a homeless shelter represented such an extreme level of discrimination that it shocked even Miller and Walsh, whose faces showed surprise at Patterson's overt racism. The security footage captured their expressions as they realized the officer was taking their discriminatory behavior to a level that could expose them all to serious legal consequences. Dr. Miles absorbed Patterson's insults with remarkable composure, though the camera detected a slight smile that suggested knowledge these men didn't possess. "I see," he said quietly, his tone carrying implications that none of them could yet understand. "So you're refusing me service based on your assumptions about my race and economic status, and you're threatening me with arrest for attempting to exercise my civil rights." Patterson's response demonstrated either complete ignorance of civil rights law or willful disregard for constitutional protections. "I'm not threatening anything," he said, though his hand remained near his weapon and his posture remained aggressive. "I'm just suggesting you find somewhere more appropriate for someone in your situation." His continued use of coded language revealed his attempt to maintain plausible deniability while making his discriminatory intent absolutely clear. The security camera captured Dr. Miles reaching for his cell phone, a movement that immediately triggered heightened alertness from all three men facing him. Patterson's hand moved closer to his weapon. Miller stepped back from the counter, and Walsh moved toward the security station, their reactions revealing the systemic assumptions about black men and potential threat that permeated their thinking. The simple act of reaching for a phone was treated as a potentially dangerous escalation by people whose prejudice had overridden their common sense. "I think I need to make some calls," Dr. Miles announced calmly, his thumb moving across his phone screen with practiced ease. The statement triggered visible anxiety among the hotel staff and the officer, though none of them could comprehend the full implications of their situation or understand who Dr. Miles might be calling at this late hour. Patterson made his final and most damaging error in judgment, one that would later result in federal charges and the end of his law enforcement career. "Put that phone away and move along, or you'll be spending the night in jail instead of a hotel," he threatened, his abuse of police authority now clearly documented. The threat to arrest someone for using a phone while being discriminated against represented such a clear violation of constitutional rights that it provided prosecutors with unambiguous evidence of criminal misconduct. Dr. Miles made his decision with the calm deliberation of someone who had faced discrimination before, but never with the power to respond so definitively. The security camera captured him pocketing his phone and slowly gathering his identification and business card from the marble counter. His movements were unhurried and purposeful, suggesting someone making mental notes rather than someone retreating in defeat. "I think I understand the situation perfectly now," he said, his voice carrying a weight that none of the hotel staff could interpret. "This has been extremely educational." As Dr. Miles walked toward the lobby exit, the security footage recorded the reactions of everyone involved in the discriminatory incident. Miller appeared visibly relieved, his shoulders relaxing as he watched the unwanted guest finally leaving. Walsh looked satisfied with her decision to support her employee's actions, nodding approvingly at what she perceived as a successful defense of hotel standards. Officer Patterson seemed pleased with his show of authority, his posture suggesting satisfaction with how he had handled what he viewed as a potential troublemaker. None of them realized they had just discriminated against the man who now owned the hotel and possessed the power to terminate their employment immediately. The irony was captured perfectly by the security system as Dr. Miles paused at the glass doors, turning back for one final look at the scene. His expression suggested someone committing every detail to memory and already planning the consequences that would follow. Outside the hotel, Dr. Miles positioned himself where he could observe the lobby through the glass doors while making the phone calls that would set dramatic events in motion. The external security cameras captured him speaking animatedly on his phone, his gestures indicating serious conversations with people who clearly held significant authority. His first call was to his corporate legal team, awakening attorneys who would spend the rest of the night preparing for what would become a landmark civil rights case. Inside the lobby, the hotel staff's behavior revealed their true attitudes now that they believed the problem had been resolved. Miller could be seen laughing with Thompson about how they had handled the situation, their body language suggesting celebration rather than concern about potential legal consequences. The audio system picked up fragments of their conversation, including Miller's comment that, "You could tell just by looking at him that he didn't belong here." Patterson completed his incident report without mentioning the discriminatory encounter, his omission representing official misconduct that would later add federal charges to his legal troubles. His report described routine patrol activities and assistance with hotel security, but made no reference to threatening a guest with arrest for attempting to secure accommodation. The deliberate falsification of police records would prove to be one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against him. Dr. Miles' second phone call was to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, a conversation that would trigger a federal investigation before sunrise. His third call reached the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, initiating an investigation into Patterson's conduct that would ultimately result in criminal charges. The external cameras captured him taking detailed notes during each conversation, documenting the official response to his complaints, and establishing a timeline that would prove crucial in subsequent legal proceedings. The most significant call came at 11:47 p.m., when Dr. Miles contacted his corporate headquarters and spoke directly with his vice president of operations. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, during which Dr. Miles provided a detailed account of the discrimination he had experienced and the systematic nature of the problems he had observed. His instructions were clear and unambiguous. Prepare termination paperwork for every employee involved in or complicit with the discriminatory behavior, effective immediately upon his return to the hotel. By midnight, a team of corporate attorneys, human resources personnel, and security specialists was en route to the Grandview Hotel. Dr. Miles had also contacted local media outlets, ensuring that the story of discrimination at his own hotel would receive the public attention it deserved. His decision to expose the incident publicly, rather than handle it quietly, demonstrated his commitment to using his experience as a catalyst for broader social change. The security cameras continued recording as Dr. Miles observed additional discriminatory behavior through the glass doors. A young Latina woman approached the front desk seeking accommodation and received identical treatment to what Dr. Miles had experienced. Miller's immediate claim of no availability, despite the computer system showing open rooms, provided additional evidence that the discrimination was systematic rather than personal. Dr. Miles documented this second incident with photos taken through the glass, creating evidence that would prove the hotel's discriminatory practices extended beyond his individual experience. The woman left after a brief interaction, becoming another victim of the systematic civil rights violations that Dr. Miles was now committed to exposing and eliminating. As the night progressed, hotel staff remained completely unaware that their actions had triggered a corporate and legal response that would forever change their lives. They continued their routines, processed legitimate guests, and maintained the discriminatory practices that had become normalized within their workplace culture. Their ignorance of the consequences bearing down on them created a surreal atmosphere captured perfectly by the security systems that would soon provide evidence in multiple legal proceedings. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would expose the depth of discrimination at the Grandview Hotel and send shockwaves through the hospitality industry nationwide. The legal consequences began unfolding with remarkable speed as Dr. Miles's team of attorneys mobilized throughout the night. By 6 a.m. on December 19th, federal civil rights investigators had secured copies of all security footage from the Grandview Hotel, creating an unassailable record of the discriminatory behavior that had occurred. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation under Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, with prosecutors immediately recognizing that the recorded evidence provided one of the clearest cases of public accommodation discrimination they had ever encountered. Officer David Patterson faced the most severe legal consequences, as his use of police authority to support and enforce discrimination transformed a civil rights violation into criminal misconduct. Federal prosecutors filed charges under Section 242 of Title 18, which criminalizes the willful deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Patterson's threats to arrest Dr. Miles for using his phone and seeking accommodation, combined with his explicitly racist statements captured on audio, provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of criminal intent. He was suspended without pay, pending the outcome of federal criminal proceedings that could result in up to 10 years in federal prison. The Chicago Police Department launched its own internal investigation into Patterson's conduct, reviewing his entire career for patterns of discriminatory behavior. The investigation revealed 17 previous complaints of racial bias that had been dismissed or inadequately investigated by supervisors who failed to recognize systematic misconduct. Patterson's personnel file contained a disturbing pattern of excessive force incidents involving minority citizens, complaints that had been treated as isolated events rather than evidence of ongoing civil rights violations. Jason Miller, Patricia Walsh, and Marcus Thompson faced immediate termination from the Grandview Hotel, but their legal troubles extended far beyond loss of employment. Dr. Miles filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking damages for discrimination, emotional distress, and violation of his constitutional rights. The lawsuit named not only the individual perpetrators, but also the hotel's parent company, Prestige Hospitality Management, for creating and maintaining a corporate culture that enabled systematic discrimination to flourish unchecked. The evidence against the hotel employees was overwhelming and undeniable. Security footage captured every discriminatory statement, every false claim about availability, and every attempt to intimidate Dr. Miles into leaving without service. Audio recordings provided crystal clear documentation of racist language and explicit acknowledgement of discriminatory intent. Computer records proved that Miller had lied about room availability, showing that the hotel was operating at only 58% capacity when he claimed to be fully booked. Prestige Hospitality Management faced a corporate crisis that extended far beyond the Grandview Hotel incident. Federal investigators expanded their investigation to include other properties in the company's portfolio, examining booking records and complaint patterns that suggested systematic discrimination across multiple locations. The company's previous settlements of 3 discrimination lawsuits provided evidence of knowledge and willful indifference to civil rights violations, potentially exposing executives to personal liability under federal civil rights statutes. The financial consequences proved devastating for all parties involved. Dr. Miles's lawsuit sought punitive damages in excess of $50 million, an amount designed to send a clear message about the cost of discrimination to the entire hospitality industry. Prestige Hospitality Management's stock price plummeted as investors fled from a company facing federal investigation and massive legal liability. The company's insurance carriers denied coverage for intentional discrimination, leaving executives personally exposed to financial ruin. Miller, Walsh, and Thompson discovered that their discriminatory actions had destroyed not only their current employment, but their future career prospects as well. The federal lawsuit became a matter of public record, ensuring that any future employers would be aware of their involvement in systematic civil rights violations. Their attempts to find new employment in the hospitality industry were unsuccessful, as companies feared association with individuals who had generated such negative publicity and legal exposure. The legal proceedings moved forward with unusual speed due to the clarity of the evidence and the federal government's commitment to prosecuting civil rights violations. Patterson's criminal trial was scheduled within 6 months, while the civil lawsuit against the hotel employees proceeded on an accelerated timeline that would bring the case to trial within 18 months of the original incident. The broader legal implications extended throughout the hospitality industry, as federal investigators used the Grandview Hotel case as a model for examining discriminatory practices at other establishments. The case established new precedents for corporate liability when companies failed to address systematic discrimination, creating legal standards that would protect future victims of similar treatment. 2 years after the discriminatory incident that shocked the hospitality industry, the lives of everyone involved had been permanently transformed by the consequences of that December night. Dr. Jonathan Miles had emerged not only victorious in his legal battles, but as a national figure in the fight against workplace discrimination. His decision to expose the racism at his own hotel rather than quietly handle the situation internally had resonated with civil rights advocates and business leaders across America. Dr. Miles used his experience to create the Miles Foundation for Hospitality Equality, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating discrimination in the travel and tourism industry. The foundation developed comprehensive training programs that went far beyond superficial customer service techniques, addressing implicit bias and systematic racism that pervaded many hospitality establishments. Within 18 months, over 200 hotels and restaurants had implemented the foundation's training protocols, creating measurable improvements in service equality across participating businesses. The financial settlement from his federal lawsuit, which ultimately totaled $47 million, provided Dr. Miles with resources to expand his advocacy work nationwide. He established a legal defense fund that provided free representation to victims of hospitality discrimination, ensuring that other individuals would not face the choice between accepting unfair treatment or bearing the cost of expensive litigation. The fund had already successfully prosecuted over 30 discrimination cases, creating a network of legal precedents that strengthened civil rights protections across the industry. Miles Hospitality Group had grown into one of the most respected hotel chains in America, with properties that set industry standards for inclusive service and diverse employment practices. Dr. Miles implemented revolutionary policies that included mystery shopper programs specifically designed to test for discriminatory behavior, with immediate termination for any employee found to be denying service based on race or other protected characteristics. His hotels became training destinations for other hospitality companies seeking to improve their civil rights compliance. The professional recognition that followed Dr. Miles's courageous stand had elevated him to national prominence as a business leader and social justice advocate. He had been invited to speak at major universities, corporate conferences, and civil rights organizations about the intersection of business success and social responsibility. His book, Checking In: A CEO's Fight Against Hospitality Discrimination, had become required reading in business schools and hospitality management programs across the country. Jason Miller's life had taken a dramatically different trajectory following his termination and the federal lawsuit. Unable to find employment in the hospitality industry due to his documented history of discrimination, he had struggled with a series of low-paying jobs that provided neither career advancement nor financial security. The financial judgment against him in the civil rights lawsuit had resulted in wage garnishment that would continue for decades, ensuring that he would bear the economic consequences of his discriminatory actions for the rest of his working life. Miller's attempts to rehabilitate his reputation through public apologies and claims of personal growth had been met with skepticism from both employers and civil rights organizations. His participation in court-mandated sensitivity training had been viewed as legally required rather than genuine personal development. The permanent nature of Internet records meant that any potential employer could easily discover his involvement in one of the most publicized discrimination cases in recent hospitality industry history. Patricia Walsh faced similar professional devastation, with her management career effectively ended by her role in supporting and institutionalizing discriminatory practices. Her decision to blindly support her employees' racism rather than investigate obvious civil rights violations had cost her not only her position, but her professional reputation throughout the industry. The lawsuit's findings that she had created and maintained a culture of discrimination made her unemployable in any management capacity within hospitality or customer service industries. Officer David Patterson's consequences proved to be the most severe of all the perpetrators involved in the incident. His federal criminal conviction on civil rights violations had resulted in 18 months in federal prison and the permanent loss of his law enforcement career. Upon his release, Patterson faced the challenge of finding employment with a federal felony conviction on his record, particularly one involving abuse of police authority and racial discrimination. The Chicago Police Department had used Patterson's case as a catalyst for comprehensive reforms in training and accountability procedures. His conviction had exposed systematic failures in investigating complaints of police misconduct, leading to policy changes that required independent review of all discrimination allegations. The department had implemented new training programs focused on constitutional rights and bias-free policing, using Patterson's case as an example of how personal prejudice could destroy both police careers and community trust. The broader impact of the Grandview Hotel incident had created lasting changes throughout the hospitality industry and law enforcement community. Federal legislation had been proposed to strengthen penalties for public accommodation discrimination, while industry organizations had developed new standards for bias prevention training. The case had become a landmark example of how individual courage and corporate accountability could work together to advance civil rights and social justice. The story of that December night continued to resonate as a powerful reminder that discrimination carried consequences, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, could ultimately prevail when victims had the courage and resources to fight back against systemic racism.